Hi, this is J. Michael Straczynski, and you are listening to the Captain America Comic Book Fans Podcast.
Well, greetings, Cap fans, and welcome to another episode of the Captain America Comic Book Fans Podcast. It's episode 177. I'm your host, Rick Verbanis, and as always, I am joined by, some would say, the best gosh darn host out there. And his name is Mr. Bob Lucius. Oh, Bob. Knock, knock.
Who's there, Rick?
John.
John who?
Jon Waller Sewell is our guest today, and he's going to be joining us a little bit later. Glad you asked.
Well, I am excited and thrilled to hear that, Rick.
Yeah, we haven't had John on in a while. He's done a voice here or there and called in, so it'd be nice to have him back.
Yeah, is this an audition?
It is. I got a few complaints after last week's episode with all your reading and your I guess different voices, which were all the same voice.
All the same. Yeah.
So I actually John called me up right away and said, hey man, you that last episode, you know I'm free, right?
Well, not free, but reasonable.
Yeah, sure.
Right.
Yeah.
But it's hard to compete.
Yeah. Well, I know, Bob, you're on the show because you are free. So that is anything else would be a pay raise.
Right.
How's your week going, Bob?
Woo! It's been a big week, Rick. Gosh, so much going on. Had a endoscopy, which was fun.
Again?
Yeah, I had another
Well, you
one.
can't get enough of those things?
You know, when you have one, you really can't quit it.
Yeah?
Yeah.
You're like an addict.
It's a real joy.
You're like, Doc, something's, can I come in?
Yeah. And my son is in a basketball championship this week. So it's a banner week for me.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
How many you got the breakaway pants?
Oh, I got my big foam fingers. I have that. Yeah. The doctor, he gave me the foam fingers after I got my
I don't want to hear about what the doctor did with his finger.
It's a souvenir.
I'm just hoping this was urine unconscious part, right?
Well, you know, they call it semi-unconscious. So
don't want to hear about anything anything. You just keep that to yourself.
So how about your week, Rick?
Oh, Bob, I'm doing great. If I was any better, they'd have to sedate me. You don't believe me?
I don't believe you.
Yeah. So here's the thing. So my daughter, she's in color guard. She's captain of the winter guard team, and you know all the parents have to pitch in and do stuff to help out. So I help out with the props because that is what I am skilled for, meaning I push things.
Yeah.
And so we were in Pennsylvania, and it was about 10 days ago, and very first heavy piece of equipment coming down the ramp from the truck, and I'm there, you know, holding it so it doesn't slide down, right? And I'm like, you know, I pull something in my back, and then I spend the rest of the day pushing things around with a pulled back. And so, you know, a couple days go by and I'm feeling better. And then Tuesday comes and we get like 10 inches of snow. So I go out there and it's the wet, heavy kind of snow. You wouldn't know because you live in Florida.
Yeah, we have wet, heavy rain.
Do you?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm shoveling the snow. Fine. No problems. You know what? I'm doing okay. And then a few days go by and Saturday comes and we get another 10 inches of snow, but it's the light, fluffy kind, Bob.
Oh, fluffy.
Yeah, it's the easy kind. Go! I pulled really bad my back.
Yeah.
And I'm like, crap. and it was really bad. And then I was like, well, maybe the next day will be better. I wake up Sunday, no, still the same. Maybe Monday. Wake up Monday, no, still the same. Wake up Tuesday, no, still the same. So I went to my chiropractor this afternoon, and after like a 10-minute exam, he's like, "It's not your spine. You strained the muscles, in this area and everything." And then he went on to explain to me all the different things that I'm doing wrong, which I'm putting pressure on that area. And then, oh, get this, Rob, I'm old. So that had something to do with it. And then he taped my back. So if you see me sitting here funny, he taped an X on my lower back to keep it from like holding it in place. So I know when I'm doing things, because apparently I sit wrong, I stand up wrong, I breathe wrong. And I have 5 decades worth of bad habits to basically change, or else this is going to keep happening.
Right. You know what? I got to be honest with you, Rick. You lost me after the second snowstorm when you said fluffy, because all I could think about was the fluffy dog joke.
Oh, the fluffy dog joke.
If only we had time for that joke again.
Oh,
but it's a 2-hour show. So
yeah. You know it. Gosh,
love that joke.
I got to remember what episode that was, because it was in the after the credits for people who stuck around to listen.
Right.
Because it's like a 10-minute joke.
It is a 10-minute joke. Yes.
I love that you love that joke, because most people I tell that joke to, they're just like, you son of a bitch.
I find that joke, it ages like a fine wine. Right?
It really does.
Sometimes I'm just sitting on the couch watching, the news or something, and I just burst out laughing because it, like a depth charge, comes rumbling back to the surface. So.
It's really funny for the joke teller. That's all I'm going to say. All right. Well, Bob, I'm excited about today's episode because we're doing another version of ReCap, which is when we don't go through it panel by panel, we don't act out what's going on in the comic. We just give our synopsis, and then we discuss the comics. And because we're going through 6 issues here, Bob, it is the current Captain America volume, which is volume 11, from 2023, issues 1 through 6, which 6 just recently came out. So this goes into early 2024, written by J. Michael Straczynski. And I thought it'd be great, because J. Michael Straczynski, people refer to him as JMS. I figured, why not have JWS on, because it's like an upside down M, right?
Okay.
And that was the reason. That's the whole reason why I invited John.
Well, okay. It makes, it all makes sense. Again, it's like that sunshine. What is it? Sunshine in New York. The way your mind works. I need like thumbtacks and yarn to just put it all together.
I mean, come on, JMS, JWS.
Yeah, I like it.
I actually spent some time trying to, for my hello for you, because it was kind of lame. I was trying to come up with like Bizarro type of quote, right? Because JWS isn't quite Bizarro of JMS, and then I thought it was a bit of a stretch after I spent like 8 minutes looking at Bizarro quotes, and then I was pretty sure no one would get it.
I thought we were having him on just because he's supremely talented and funny.
No, I have Jon Waller Sewell on the show.
Oh.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to confuse you. But you know what? Let's get him out of the green room, right? Probably all those brown M&Ms are gone by now. So let's invite John into the show.
All right, let's do it.
Hi, John. Welcome to the show.
Hey guys, should I be concerned about the fact there's this weird writing all over the green room? It's like all on the walls and the ceiling. I couldn't read it. It was weird.
It was weird.
Yeah.
Maybe strange.
Yeah.
Nice.
I see what he did there.
Foreshadowing.
Oh,
and by the way, my middle initial is M.
Is it now?
Yes.
Oh, so it's JMWS,
That's right.
and we could just take the Waller out and just call you JMS.
Sure. When I met him, I didn't have Waller in my name, so I was just JMS.
Oh,
Nice.
we'll have to hear about this. I knew coming back, because for people who don't know, John, a friend of mine who I met through my comic book store, and John was a fantastic customer, long time in the store, and I remember I didn't know who JMS was at the time, and this was, gosh, 2000. Let's say 2004 to 2009, 2003 to 2009, I think I had the store. And I really wasn't familiar with JMS. I never watched Babylon 5. And but I remember John talking about it. And I remember him getting really excited when like JMS was, came on to various comics, and because that impressed me. Like you were a big JMS fan, right?
Yeah, yeah. Rising Stars is one of my favorite comic series pretty much of all time. So when he started doing some work for Marvel and did his run on Thor and Fantastic Four and all that stuff, I was all there for it.
Yeah. Well, tell us about the time you met JMS.
Oh, he happened to come to Dragon Con here in Atlanta. This was many years ago. So, I mean, he would have absolutely no reason to remember me, but I did try to point out to him, hey, we have the same initials. And he's like, okay, great. Let me just sign the books.
Move on.
he's like, then why am I signing it? You just sign it. It's the same
just
damn thing.
Scribble your initials. Here, I'll show you how I do it. Next.
What did you get signed?
Rising Stars. Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's a creator-owned book. I mean, like that should have impressed him, as opposed to a license of another,
Well, I had some of the Fantastic Four books as well, but yeah, mostly Rising Stars.
That's cool.
Sorry, that's it. There's not a whole lot to it.
No more than that? You didn't go out for lunch after back to...
Oh man, no.
No.
It wasn't like Justin Jordan where I took him out for dinner later. It's just meet him, book signed, done.
Yeah.
Bob's like, who's Justin Jordan?
Who's
See?
Justin?
Yeah. Justin Jordan is a writer. He did a book called The Strange Talent of Luther Strode, and then went on from there. He's worked for DC and stuff like that.
Right.
But back when he was just Luther Strode, struggling to get by, I was like, hey man, my buddy Seth and I will buy you dinner. Come on, let's go.
Nice.
John, didn't you and me have dinner with, was it Brian Pulido?
You, Seth, and I all three had dinner with Brian Pulido, and then you abandoned us.
Right before the check came, or
no, that was when you were working for a certain company. I don't know that I'm allowed to talk about that.
But you were talking about that.
Yeah, but you were working for a certain company, and you actually had to leave and go take care of a few other things. But part of your company responsibilities is you were supposed to entertain Mr. Pulido. So you're like, well, I got two different things I'm supposed to be doing at the same time. Hey guys, why don't you entertain Brian Pulido?
Wow.
So we had a great time.
He was entertained.
I hope he was. Seth and I were highly entertained. We got an education about the comics industry.
I bet. Yeah.
Yeah. He's been around a long time. We actually had him on the show here. On episode 60. We had him on the show because he's a big Captain America fan, and then came on to talk about his collection and everything like that. Brian's a cool guy.
He is.
All right, so today with us doing recap, I figured there's 6 issues here. We each take 2 issues, and kind of like take turns, and then we'll go through, give our I guess synopsis of what's going on in that particular issue, and then we can interrupt each other and go like, I had a thought about that, or whatever. Like it's just 3 guys. Rapid cap, having a good time, talking about this first story arc by JMS. Sound good?
A point of order. Aren't we recapping Cap?
We are recapping Cap. Isn't that what I said?
No, you said wrapping cap.
Oh, well, I said we were going to recap. Do you see what I have to put up with here, John?
Are we gonna
I,
wrap
I
up
do,
capping?
and now I understand the audition.
Yeah.
Uh,
Oh. All right. Well, let's get to issue number 1. So we were very excited when Alana Smith was on the show and she talked about JMS coming on, and she gave us a little foreshadowing. She said, she was really excited in the fact that, he was going to be talking about Steve Rogers, back in the late 30s. You would get to see pre-serum Steve Rogers. That's a big check in my world. And then she also mentioned, she was surprised, like, the humor, that Steve's got a sense of humor and things like that. So these are things I was kind of like really excited for, and I was like really looking forward to seeing. So we'll see if you guys agree if the humor was there in this series. And then I guess what we could do. Shall I read the solicitation, Bob, for number 1?
Just out of tradition, I think you should.
All right. What future awaits the man out of time? Decades ago, Steve Rogers changed the world forever. Now, powerful and insidious forces were assembling to ensure he never does it again. Past, present, and future collide as the man out of time reckons with an existential threat determined to set the world on a darker path at any cost. Esteemed creators J. Michael Straczynski and Jesús Saíz embark on an exhilarating new journey for Captain America.
That sounds amazing.
I know. It's almost like we should read it.
Yeah.
So we talked a little bit about the creators. J. Michael Straczynski is the writer. Jesús Saíz is the penciler and inker. The colorist, Matt Hollingsworth. Letterer, Joe Caramanga. And then editor, Alana Smith. This had a release date of September 20th of 2023 and a cover date of November 2023. Bob, do you want to take us through the cover of number 1?
Sure, I'd be happy to, Rick. So it looks like we're seeing a typical street on the Upper East Side of Manhattan. It's nighttime, or at dusk at the very least, and we see a bunch of brownstones lining the corners. The sides of the street. And in the middle of the street, we see a pre-serum Steve Rogers. It looks to be around maybe 17 years old, maybe a little bit younger. And he's got a bloody nose, and his shirt is torn, and it's pulled out. It's untucked from his pants, and he's in a fighting pose. And you can tell that he's been in a scrap, but he is persistent and he's not giving up. And then looming above him in the sky is a modern day Captain America in his uniform, with his shield advanced in front of him and his left fist drawn back, ready to strike, and a look of determination on his face. And so what we're seeing here is a juxtaposition of course, pre-serum Steve back in the 1930s, late 1930s, and maybe a Steve Rogers of present day.
Very nicely done, Bob. What did you guys think of this cover? I liked it because it certainly demonstrates what you're going to get, right? You're going to get both a pre-serum Steve, young Steve, and you're also going to get Captain America. So it tells you that what you're seeing here in the flashbacks is more than just a quick flashback. Like, there's going to be a big part of this story is going to be a young Steve.
I agree. I thought the cover was iconic, and just getting into even some of the smaller details, the font on the title logo and the little stripes there in between and all that it just adds to the aesthetic. And I was very excited for the whole telling the two different eras story.
Yeah, let's talk about that logo, right? So what we're seeing here between Captain and America. Now, Captain is slightly smaller font, and then America's bigger font. But in between, as you mentioned, is a red, white, and blue stripe. But Bob, that's more than just a stripe, right?
Yeah, there's some captain's bars in there. So we're seeing a military rank insignia in between Captain and America.
Yeah, we haven't seen that before in the 85 years in the logo. It hasn't really been, the whole military part has been kind of played down.
Yeah. Yeah, surely. I mean, it's always been a bit of an honorary rank, right, for the most part, and with I think Mythos being the only exception to that. So yeah, it's interesting to see that put in here on the logo. Don't know where they're going to go with that, but we'll have to see.
Um, and then when you guys got there were multiple covers that came, just like, there's variants, but with a number one, especially on a major title like this, they go overboard, and there's plenty of different covers. Which covers did you personally get?
I got the standard regular one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I did get and I know I got a handful of other ones, but I just can't remember off the top of my head.
I got this one. I got the shiny one.
Ooh.
Right.
Ooh,
Or he's
I got the
uh
shiny one.
paratrooping
Yeah.
down, right? And you see explosions around him and everything.
Well, that's nice.
I got that one.
Yeah.
It was hard to believe it was only $5.99.
That's a nice
that's
back
not
cover
much
too.
more expensive than the regular.
Yeah, I know, and I was like, that should have been like a $9.99 cover. Seems like a deal. So that was a major portion of why I feel like I'm getting a deal.
I can't afford not to get it at this price.
Exactly.
Yeah.
All right, so let's get to the recap portion of this. All right. So I actually went to marvelfandom.com because they did an excellent job, and I was like, I'm not gonna rewrite this. I'm just gonna use their synopsis here. And so I'll be reading along, and feel free to, chime in if you so are moved. It begins with a routine event. A disgraced scientist has built a giant robot dog mech and scales an office building with it, swearing vengeance on the man who stole his wife. Steve Rogers, Captain America, jumps the street on his motorbike and drives through a floor of office workers to get to where he can do some good, triumphantly defeating the mech. So there's a little bit of also during this, it's an inner monologue of Steve. So I thought it was interesting, the way JMS is setting up this story. Like, we're already inside Steve's head. So you could see right away that this is important, right? Like, he could start with just an action scene, but no, he wants to start inside Steve's head. So I think that just as a precursor to what we can expect for the rest of this story is that, it's important that we kind of understand and see what's going on with Steve. And it basically says, like, there's a lot of different ways a story can start, and this is one of them. And I'm going to, I like the beginning because it's an action scene, and it kind of draws you in, kind of like a James Bond movie starts, right? And I was a little taken aback, though, because it seemed rather reckless of Steve to break into a floor of an office building where he could easily injure someone. But I suppose, like, that's like the fun of comics, right? Like that, suspending disbelief and for the moment just to enjoy the spectacle of it all. But I feel like I want to read, and I'm not going to do this often, but I do want to read the inner monologue because I thought it was interesting. Lots of people wonder where superhero stories get started. Not the origins necessarily, just the latest, whatever it is. Sometimes it starts like this. And I like where he says, just the latest, whatever it is, right? Here's the latest number one of Captain America. It was almost like a tongue in cheek, to do that. And so he says, sometimes it starts like this and that and a whole lot of this. I'd be lying if I said I didn't enjoy this part just a little. And he's referring to jumping over the street in the motorcycle landing in. And the rest, well, you probably saw it on the evening news. But that's not how every story starts. Same as you've got a job, and that comes with stories and maybe some hobbies or secrets. And those always start with stories. And then you come home and a whole other kind of story happens. So again, I like how JMS is setting this up, right? We're in Steve's head, and then there's a couple pages of action, And he's like, you know what? You could have seen this on the evening news. You come home and a whole nother story starts. And here you are, Steve, as a civilian. And you right away know that this is going to be a book about Steve.
I think that's a good read on that one, Rick. Makes a lot of sense. I think you nailed the sort of the intro, right? It really wasn't about what was going on with the mech dog, right? And that could have been any villain. It was really about starting to get inside Steve's head and set the tone for the rest of the story arc, really.
Yeah, and I was really excited when you get to that page turn, you get to that part where you go home, because he's tying into some of the stuff that was going on in the previous arc with Lansing, and I'm blanking on the other
Kelly.
name. Thank you. And I love that. I was so glad to see it, and what comes next, I'm not going to spoil because this is your issue, but I just really enjoyed it.
Right. So Steve meets his building supervisor, who announces that the owner of the apartment building has decided that it's too expensive, so they're evicting the tenants and selling the building cheaply and quickly. And I love where Steve's like, "How cheap?" and then, you know, Steve calls his friend Tony Stark, aka Iron Man, asks for a loan of the price of the building, makes the offer, buys the building, and vows to do right by his neighbors. And he puts up a sign: under new ownership, rent controlled, renovations begin immediately. So then we get to the title page, and so it just, there's no recap to put here, right? So it just says Captain America Beginnings, and then it gets into credits. But I want to read the top because, you know, we don't do that often when we're reading these, but when it's a different time period and everything, because they're always slightly different. And so this one kicks off volume 11. So I think it's just, you know, worth reading. As the world teetered on the brink of global war, frail Steve Rogers entered a secret laboratory and was transformed into the American super soldier. For 5 thrilling years, he fought the Axis powers until a freak stroke of fate threw him into suspended animation. When he awoke, he was a man decades out of his time. Since that fateful day, Steve Rogers has sought his destiny in this brave new world. Captain America Beginnings. So, as he works to repair existing damage, Steve explains to a neighbor who brings him a meal that he used to live here with his mother back in the 1930s. And the other place he associates with her is his father's grave, which she visited twice a year, every year, until she died. The neighbor does the math and realizes that from 1936, when his mother died, to 1940, when he became Captain America, Steve Rogers was alone in the world. And I think this is really cool, right? Like, we've seen Steve Rogers as a kid in some stories. And, you know, in volume 7, you know, when Rick Remender was doing it, he had a lot of flashbacks to that time period, but his mom was still alive. And we really haven't explored this particular time, post mom dying and Steve basically being on his own as a, you know, a young mid teenager. And so I thought that was an interesting choice on JMS's, you know, interesting choice by him to really focus on this time period.
Well, I was just going to ask. I mean, you guys are the brain trust here. Has there been any other depiction that you can recall of Steve visiting his mom and dad's grave, particularly in the modern? I mean, well, in any era for that matter. I don't know if I've ever seen that before. I've seen him visit, you know, the graves of his, you know, Bucky, right? Or at least the memorial for Bucky when he thought Bucky was deceased, but I've never seen him visit his mom or dad's grave before, and I really love this.
Yeah, that's a good question. I want to say yes, but I couldn't place it. I you know, but I could be wrong. I really don't know.
A question for our listeners, perhaps.
Yep.
I also wanted to add just the one of the things I really appreciate about this whole setup is the pacing of it.
Mhm.
Even going back just to the title page, you can see JMS's cinematic mindset
Mhm.
of, you're going to start out with the big blockbuster action, and we're going to get to the real actual meat of what it is I'm trying to do here. So he's back at home, and then, under the new management, credits. Here we
Yep.
go. And so the page that you got to, though, is when he's talking to one of the tenants there, and she's doing the math and everything, and she asks him, but how did you survive? And then there's just this close up on him,
Yeah.
right in the middle of the page. And then you get to the flashback, and he's there. He's already been beat up. He's in his young, frail, and all it says, I got by.
Yep. Yeah. No, I agree. I think it has a cinematic feel to it for sure. And so as his neighbor says goodbye, Steve thinks back to 1936 when the building supervisor was forced to evict him for delinquent rent, but promised he could keep his things in a storage unit in the back because he had known the Rogers and Steve was good people. And Steve had thanked the super and told him not to fret, saying, I always land on my feet. Thinking back on that exchange, Steve actually cries briefly before getting back to work. A few days later, something began with a routine event. Susan Storm of the Fantastic Four meets him, explaining that, well, the FF needs help fighting the dictator Psycho Man and his daughter, who are gathering an army in the microverse. Steve agrees to help and is soon battling the forces of evil in another dimension for 2 days. And he returns home to find a crashed car and a group of armed robbers on the street outside. And rushing into the fight, Steve is exhausted from his fight against Psycho Man. But a shout from a helpful passing construction contractor alerts him to a surprise attack. And he takes care of everything there. Um, so I liked this because, you know, we rarely do see Steve in the pages of Captain America interact with other heroes. There's his supporting cast, right? So we might see, the Steve Rogers or Captain America centric characters, but the larger Marvel universe we don't see. And so here he is in Manhattan, right? And sure enough, he's got to have to run into other heroes, and now people know where he lives. They can just come and ask him for help, and so I kind of like that.
I do too, Rick. I mean, and I like, another feature of this. I mean, when he comes back, we see something that we don't normally see as well. And that is, he may be super enhanced, but he's still human. He can still experience exhaustion and the effects of exhaustion on reaction time and cognition and we see that here. We see that he is vulnerable. He's not invulnerable all the time.
Hmm.
Just a local passerby, a contractor is able to be there in time and help him out when he needs it. And I like that vulnerability here in Cap. I like to see that.
Yeah.
I think
So
it's also worth noting that who he runs into specifically, who he's helping out, the Fantastic Four, who is JMS written before, the Fantastic Four. We might see some other characters in the future issues that JMS has been known for writing.
Little Rising Stars action.
Nice,
Excellent.
nice.
So after Steve's mom died, he had slept in warehouses and worked multiple jobs to feed himself and try to build savings. And one day while selling papers, his good friend Arnie Roth had met him to help with the Daily Bugle's atrocious reportage of the Sudanland crisis, before saying that he knew a man whose building was charging low rents to friend, and he was asking for a security deposit. So Steve's energized by the prospect of an achievable win, so he redoubles his efforts. So Steve, and then we cut to modern times. Steve tracks down the construction contractor Soon Kim, who admitted that he was unemployed and living out of his van with his family at the moment. So Steve offered to hire him to help do the repairs on the building, and of course he accepts. Then we cut to a character we haven't seen yet, and this is it says 2 years ago, and there's this billionaire Travis Lane had hired a guide to lead him through a South American jungle in search of a temple. And on the journey, the guide had admitted that the temple was hard to find, as certain places were significant enough to defy being mapped. At a routine camp, Travis Lane had explained that the temple was important to the being called Asmodee, known to some of the ancient people as the Undying One, and to some as the Great Adversary. So Travis Lane had explained to the guy that he was seeking Asmodee to trade his soul for youth and a longer life. And the guide had laughed. And Travis Lane was seeking Asmodee and assuming that this was his own idea. Asmodee was undying because he was always active at important times, undying because he took the bodies and lives of others to do his business. Now, Travis Lane had made his fortune selling weapons to bad men and then blackmailed the authorities that had tried to stop him. So it meant he had resources. With a wave of the guide's hand, the temple appeared around them. And the guide had explained that a crossroads point in human history was coming, and that humanity must be made to take the lesser path, and that Travis Lane was the perfect puppet for the job. As vicious red smoke had flowed out of the guide, Travis Lane had screamed and screamed. So we cut to a month later, and we're in Bangkok. And a much younger Travis Lane had tracked a woman in a restaurant and introduced himself. Her name is Ariana Walters, and she had lost her job as a project manager for A.I.M. And Bob, what does A.I.M stand for?
Advanced Idea Mechanics.
Very nice. And this was during the reshuffle of The Takeover by Roberto da Costa. Does anybody know who he is? You might as well go, John, because Bob doesn't.
Was he a boxer? I think I saw him fight a welterweight, right?
Sunspot.
Sunspot, Bob. Who's Sunspot?
You got me.
He's one of the New Mutants.
Oh, okay. That's fascinating.
Bob's like, I got to get that checked out by my dermatologist. So anyway, Robert DaCosta had taken over A.I.M, and so she lost her job. So she's on the run from the authorities, and she's desperate. And he, Travis Lane, had a job offer. His goal was simple. Rather than openly threatening change and leaving their plans to be reversed by successors and reformers, they should present the illusion of change while getting everything they wanted. She had needed to hear his plan, so he told her. And that's kind of like, we don't get to hear what he says, but she agrees immediately. The plan would need resources, which he would provide, personnel, which her contacts among the former agents of A.I.M would provide, and a list of targets, some more obvious than others. So we cut back to modern time, and it's the morning after hiring Soon Kim, and Steve got up and got to work, thinking of a day in 1938. And so he thinks back to that day, and he's just short of the money he needs for the deposit for the apartment. And Steve had been sorely tempted by a hot dog stand because he was hungry, but a passerby had told him of a gathering in the park that had free food. So going there, he had been drawn to the food stands, and he barely knows the speaker and his promises of a bright future of personal prosperity and national power, of a people acting in unison towards a shared purpose, of the German-American Bund and its swastika banners. Dun, dun, dun.
Wow, that's a pretty spectacular final splash page there, Rick.
It's a pretty
Shocking.
spectacular first issue.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, we get action, we get Steve in his civilian identity in modern time. We get to see him in his teenage time. We get to see the mysterious villain being kind of putting together their plans. And then Nazis in America? I mean, how do you not read the next issue?
Right, right. Yeah. Truth is stranger than fiction. Or fiction. is
Should we get to the next issue, or do you want to
Well-
talk about this now?
What? I don't know. Is there any more to say? It's a fabulous first issue, and it ends on quite a shocker. But you know, I love there's something, John, you mentioned the pacing. I love the back and forth, you know, the time jumps.
Mhm.
You know, it's like clockwork, right? It's what metronome. That's right. It's like a metronome, back from the future to the past, to the future to the past, and along the way, like little stops prior to the present day, as it gets closer and closer and closer to the present day. It's really, really nicely paced.
Agreed. All right.
Agreed as well.
All right. So,
Sorry.
should I read the solicitation for number 2?
Oh, please, Rick.
When Spider-Man interrupts date night to ask for help taking down the Sinister Six's latest plot, Captain America begrudgingly obliges. Meanwhile, more and more of Steve's former enemies are being recruited by a mysterious new threat, one seemingly connected to an enemy Steve faced long before he picked up the shield. So the title of this story is Taking Aim, and it's the acronym AIM. And this one, we have the same creators as before. It has a release date of October 25th, 2023, cover date of November 2023. The cover is, again, by Jesús Saíz. And Bob, you want to take us through the cover?
Sure, Rick, I'd love to. So, you know, right now we've got what appears to be some scene above New York City. So, you know, we're at that mid-story level, so we can see some rooftops below us, but we can also see some towers in the background stretching up to the sky. And in the foreground, we see Spider-Man, and he's got his web, and he's swinging through space in between the buildings here. And we see Cap, and he's got his shield, and he is leaping in midair, right alongside of Spider-Man. It's a really great cover, and it's really nice to see Spider-Man on a Captain America cover. We don't get to see that too often.
So if you're looking at this cover, you have Captain America and you have Spider-Man. Which of their themes pops into your head right now?
Oh, that's a
Sing it. Sing it.
Spider-Man, Spider-Man.
All right.
Does whatever a spider can.
Okay.
Spins a web.
All right. You can. Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry, I got the
Yeah.
point.
Yeah.
How about you, John? Which theme popped into your head? Was it when Captain America swings his mighty shield?
Yeah, it is going to be that one. It really
lies,
is. Maybe it's just
damnable lies.
just because he's in the foreground. But what I will say is more than a song or anything else, what this cover gave me the feel of is old 1970s, early 1980s Marvel team up.
Mm,
Ooh, yeah,
Me
you're
of
right.
that stuff.
Yeah.
does look cool. All right, Bob,
All right.
you're up.
All right. So, you know, we start this issue where we left off with the last one. And we see this gathering of the German American Bund in some park here in New York City. It's we don't know which one. I'll mention a little bit later which one I think this might be, but we won't get to that yet. And Steve is observing what's going on, but only very briefly because he can't help himself. And he starts to raise questions out loud, addressing the speaker, who we have to presume is probably Fritz Kuhn, the head of the German American Bund at the time, a real world figure. And he tries to question what the plans are for, you know, this fascist movement in the United States. But before he can get very far, these two Bundist brown shirts, aka goons, come out of nowhere to accost Steve, threaten him, trying to intimidate him, trying to get him to shut up. And of course, Steve, being Steve Rogers, won't relent, right? He's persistent. And then we see in the next page, Steve walking away from this event, and his shirt is torn and untucked, and he's got a bloody nose. But you know that he gave as good as he probably got, or at least the best of his ability, before he was forced to flee the field. So after that, we see the story jump to, again.
Can I interrupt here?
Yeah.
This is the humor part, right?
Yeah.
So an old man on the park bench says, "Are you all right, son?" You know, because he's walking like you described, and
Right.
Steve says, "Yeah, well, you ought to see the other guys." And then you cut to the other guys, and they all look perfectly fine. You know? But there you go.
Yeah,
Steve got a sense of humor.
They're like brushing dust off their uniform. You know, they're not even disheveled in the least bit. But yeah, right.
And I love this part. And the old man says, "I don't think this is going as well as you think it is." But I love Steve's determination and look on his face. And he goes, "Give me time." And it's not not the last time we hear him say that in this story.
Right, right. So, you know, we have a number of time jumps in this issue, just as we did the last one, Rick. And in fact, in this one, we have 7 different time jumps. So now we take the first time jump, and it jumps to a year prior to the present day. And we see Travis Lane, the founder of this new advanced idea mechanics, who we met in the previous issue. And we see him with Ariana Walters, and they're on this dock on a Pacific island. And they're telling the real estate agent whom they just bought this property from, specifically, Travis Lane says to him, "You'll get what's coming to you," meaning, of course, he'll get his payment. And it's a little bit of a funny interaction here, because the real estate agent he sort of pushes back on that, because he understands what that cliche means in all the movies where the villains always say you'll get what's coming to you, and they end up dying. But Travis Lane, of course, shows him that the money has already been transferred into his account. So feeling somewhat mollified, the real estate agent gets on his little boat and starts to head out to sea, only to have it explode into smithereens just briefly offshore. So we get a sense here that Travis Lane isn't messing around, number one. And number two, he'd already transferred the money. So we know it's really not about the money. He's not a villain who cares about getting wealthy, right?
Yeah.
He just basically lost all those funds that he transferred to the real estate agent's banks. And that's not consequential to him at all.
He's got money to burn, literally.
Literally. Absolutely. Yeah. So that was for anybody who's listening, that was John. That wasn't me this time. Yes. So in the third time jump, we skip back to New York City in 1938, and we see Steve moving into that apartment that he was referred to by his pal Arnie Roth. But as he opens the door, he discovers that it's little more than a supply closet that has had the things moved out of it. So it doesn't even have its own bathroom, right? The bathroom's down the hall. And we get introduced at this point to one of Steve's neighbors. It's a young woman by the name of Tiffany. And she's at this point complaining to their landlord, a guy by the name of Antonelli, about the malfunctioning toilet in her apartment. And anyway, Antonelli hurries away saying he can't do anything about it. And Steve, being the kind of guy that Steve is, offers to look into it and take care of it for Tiffany. Again, we skip forward to the present time, and Steve and Sung Kim are working on renovating the apartment complex that Steve has purchased. And in particular, Steve is working on retiling one of the bathrooms. And you could tell he's paying really close attention to the job. And so Sung comes in, and they're having a conversation, and he tells Steve about his father and his father's work ethic. And we learn that Sung Kim's father was North Korean, and he was a building contractor in North Korea that had this really detailed ethic about the work that he did. And they used to call him, what was the nickname? I can't remember the nickname that they called him, but they had a nickname for his dad. About basically referencing the fact that he would not compromise on quality workmanship. And that's something that Sung Kim took on himself as well. And it was really important to him that you have pride in your workmanship.
They called him zero tolerance Daejeon.
I love that. That can be construed, of course, in many different ways when you think of the North Korean government. But in this case, it was about zero tolerance for, having great workmanship and taking pride in the work that one does with one's hands. So we learned something here about Sung Kim. Not only is he like his father, he believes in quality workmanship, but he knows, based on his father's experiences, what it means to live under oppression and exploitation, and what he's striving to achieve here in the United States. So we get a little surprise at this point. Spider-Man stops by. And he needs Steve's help. He asked for Steve's help because he has heard through Black Cat that the Sinister Six are plotting to kill Spidey that very night. So he asks Steve to help him out, and Steve had plans to go out with Sharon, but he can't.
And I like how he says it, right? He tells Spidey, he holds his hand up, right, and he counts on each finger.
Yeah,
and he says, "I'm taking Sharon to the movies tonight," right? As he touches each finger.
right.
And basically like, here are all the reasons I'm not going to do this. Now, you also skipped over is Steve making a joke here?
I was going to get to that. Yeah.
Okay.
I'm going to get to that. Yeah. But anyway, so the point is Spidey comes, he needs Steve's help. Steve has plans. Steve, once again, has his professional obligations and sets his personal life aside and says, "Yep, okay, I'll help you out." But then he makes a bit of a joke, right? Because he talks about being creeped out by 8 eyes, anything over 2 eyes, which is, of course, is a reference to spiders having many eyes. And to the point where he leans out the window and he asks Mrs. Rosen down below, how many eyes is too many? And she even responds, is this a spider thing? And of course, Steve responds yes, and Spidey is mock offended by the whole ordeal. So later on that night, Steve, now garbed as Captain America, and Spidey are waiting outside of where they're expected to encounter the Sinister Six. And time goes by, and 6:45 turns into 7:23, and 7:23 now turns into 9:15, and still nothing has occurred. And then Spidey gets a phone call from the Black Cat herself, and she lets him know that things have been called off because Doc Ock's cousin is in from out of town, and they're going to do something with the cousin, and so they have to reschedule Spidey's murder. So kind of a funny little scene.
It was.
Yeah, Cap wasted his whole night when he could have been out with Sharon at the movie theater, but that's just the guy he is, right? One of his friends needed help, and he stepped up to be there for him. So in our next time jump, we go back to 10 months previous to present day, and we're back on that AIM Island. And now at this point, we see a fully formed, laboratories and workshops, and we see a bunch of computer programmers sitting around different computer consoles. With the technicians studying their consoles, presumably working on different code. And one of them starts to notice that something's a little bit off. And he mentions it to one of his colleagues that, this code isn't all coding language. There what appears to be some magical symbols interwoven into the computer code. And then he suddenly stands up as if he's going to go off and get a cup of coffee. In fact, his friend asks him to get one for him as well. And he walks right out on the balcony and steps up onto the ledge and just pitches himself over the edge of the balcony down to his death, as if he's been somehow suddenly compelled to do so by some external force. After this, we go back to the lower east side of Manhattan back in 1938. And Steve is watching this parade of Nazi brown shirts, again, presumably the German-American Bund, parading down the street. And nearby, we get a peek at a secret meeting that's going on. And we get a chance to meet, for the first time in the book, Baron Heinrich Zemo and Baron Wolfgang von Strucker, who are now just meeting each other for the first time. In fact, Zemo mentions that he's glad to meet Strucker, but he's familiar with Strucker's reputation because there had been a plot that Strucker was involved in to assassinate a U.S. senator, which was ultimately foiled by Dominic Fortune. And that was way back in Hulk 23, which had a cover date of October of 1980. So really long time ago. that pulled that one out. Now, the interesting thing here is Strucker wasn't really in favor of that plot. And he goes on to talk about the fact that this was something that Hitler directed, that he thought was going to have a negative impact on the Nazi strategy of getting America to at least be neutral, if not an ally, to the Third Reich. Because he felt if it took out a U.S. senator, that would cause an uproar among people. It would galvanize the public perception against the Third Reich, and then have a seriously negative effect on what they were hoping to achieve. In this case, Zemo and Strucker are discussing a new strategy about finding an unpopular minority group, painting them as powerful enemies, then causing a disaster and scapegoating them so that Americans would then come to the Nazi cause, or at least be neutral in what is going on in Europe at the time. And it appears that they've set their sights on an upcoming Bund rally at Madison Square Garden. So about this same time—
Wait a minute. Why would they be targeting their own supporters?
Yeah, well, as they're discussing, right, they have to scapegoat a group. So these people, one of the interesting characters, Rick, you might have noticed, is a guy by the name of Rolf. So there's a few people here, right? We get to see Zemo, we get to see Strucker, and we see this third character whose last name is never mentioned. His name is Rolf. And we see him periodically throughout this book, and we don't really know who his last name is, but we do know, I think, that he is probably acting on behalf of this Asmodee. And so he is planting the seeds, I think, on what's going on here. And so what Zemo and Strucker have come up with Rolf's help, of course, leading him down this path, is that really the German-American Bund may be a dispensable organ to scapegoat this minority group, and then cause a public upswell of support for the Nazi, or at least the Bund.
Yeah, I'll tell you, that just goes to show how evil and vile, right, these two are, in that they're willing to sacrifice that many people and even their own followers. Just plants that makes that very clear, right? I thought it was kind of cool that we got to see von Strucker and Zemo at the same time. I don't know if I've ever seen them together before. I could be wrong, but I thought that was cool, pulling them together.
Yeah, and obviously it's before the mask, Zemo, right? So this is very early on in the war, before even American involvement, and so we are seeing him really in his prime. So we're still back in 1938, and we see Steve in his room, and he gets a visitor from his old building superintendent, Mr. Mueller, who, if you recall, Mueller had put a bunch of Steve's personal effects and his mom's personal effects in storage, and he told Steve that he would get these to him, when he could. So we jump ahead now, where maybe, I don't know, a year or so later, and Steve's got this apartment, and Mr. Mueller shows up, and he tells Steve about his personal experience. He knew Steve's dad for many years. And Mueller had emigrated to the United States from Germany before the war began in Europe. And he tells Steve that, he saw the writing on the wall. He saw what was happening, and he couldn't support it. And he felt like he had to exercise his conscience. So he had to stay there and be part of what was going on, or leave Germany. And so he chose to leave Germany and come to the United States. And one of the things he gives Steve is it's a framed shadow box with Steve's father's medals and ribbons from World War I. And we love that. I love that, having made one of those for my dad with his wartime medals and ribbons. That really resonated with me. And particularly, Steve has them hanging on his wall in his room. So love that sort of family, and just a very warm feeling for me of Steve being connected to his dad. And then at the same time, though, he hears something going on. He looks out his window and he sees a bunch of Nazis outside. Again, these brown shirts from the German American Bund, and they appear to be harassing some Hasidic Jews who are passing through the neighborhood. So Steve, being Steve, naturally he goes out to confront them. And just when we think he's about ready to get another serious beatdown by the brown shirt goons, he looks up to see all the women, his neighbors, in their windows, and they're all holding buckets. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out what might be in those buckets, but sure enough, they turn them on the brown shirts, who sort of look up and, you know, question what these women are possibly going to do to them. And it turns out all those buckets are full of the toilet materials that they can't flush because Mr. Antonelli has not yet fixed the toilets. And so the brown shirts truly are brown shirts at that point.
What are toilet materials?
Well, you know, the poop, Rick, the poop and the pee, the number one and the number two. Actually, that's a joke I use on my students, Rick. You know why after a hurricane, you never should drink water from the toilet bowl? There's two reasons.
You shouldn't do it beforehand either, but okay.
Reasons number one and reason number two. There you go. So, needless to say, the brown shirts abandon the field of combat at that point with their tails between their legs. Again, we jump forward. This time it's 6 weeks before.
Wait, may I interrupt?
You may.
Before you leave that page, I love the fact that they got doused. That's hilarious. But the very bottom panel, young Steve Rogers standing next to these two Hebrew men in the shadows, and he's casting Captain America's shadow.
That is awesome.
It just gave me chills.
Mm-hmm.
Indeed.
Talk
about
foreshadowing.
Yeah, that's beautifully rendered. All right, so now we're back in the future, right? Back to the future. We're 6 weeks prior to the present day, and we see Travis.
That made no sense.
What's
Back to the future 6 weeks prior to the current day?
It makes perfect sense. We're back to the future from 1938, but we're still not to the present day. We're 6 weeks prior to that.
So technically, wouldn't it still be the past?
Well, we could just, it depends where you started, Rick. Don't you know Buckaroo Banzai?
Nice. All right, sorry.
Nice, huh?
I will defer to you. All right.
All right. So we're 6 weeks before the present day, and we see Travis Lane in the house of Henry Kavanaugh. And we don't know who this Henry Kavanaugh is, but Travis Lane sort of fills us in on who this guy is, because he knows that that Henry is a serial killer. And
didn't he play Superman?
Henry Kavanaugh?
Yeah.
Yeah. No, maybe different guy. Maybe.
Okay.
Guy. Yeah.
I mean, he's buff.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Anyway, he's got 14 bodies buried under his house, and Lane knows that. And we see, it's really interesting. So Kavanaugh has his back to Travis Lane, and Lane's going on, and Kavanaugh's just sort of playing him along, and he opens his lunchbox and he's got a handgun in there, and he could turn around at any time and shoot this guy. But it's really interesting that he has sort of the confidence in himself and the state of mind that he's letting this play out, because he's really interested in what sort of idiot or genius would come into his house and accuse him of these things, knowing that he is a murder serial killer.
It's Henry Cavill. Henry Cavill is
Superman.
who, I was thinking.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I thought you knew that, Rick.
It's all right. Continue.
All right, thank you. So anyway, he's in Kavanaugh's home. He tells him that he knows his deal. He tells Kavanaugh what he's looking for, and basically he wants to recruit this serial murderer for A.I.M. And in particular, he shows him what power he has to offer by showing, basically in a reflection, this Asmodee demon. And of course, Kavanaugh, being the serial murderer that he is fascinated and attracted by this offer. He then explains that what he needs Kavanaugh for is essentially to deal with these agents of change. So he explains this concept of nexus points again. We were introduced to that briefly in the first issue, but he explains it more thoroughly here. And he talks about these nexus points, which are turning points in history in which agents of change arise to guide the world to the next stage of development, evolutionary development, right? Getting better, right? That's what these agents of change are supposed to do, change things for the better. But AIM's plan under Lane's leadership is to try to stop the next nexus point from ever happening. And the only way to do that is to identify those agents of change that will bring it about and kill them. And he says that's going to be Henry's job, number one. And number two, the most dangerous of those agents of change is going to be Captain America, who he's ultimately going to have to deal with.
Dun, dun,
Yeah.
dun.
So, we get to that last page, Rick, and it's a great final page, right? It's basically split in half. In the top half, we see Cap in uniform overlooking the city. And in the bottom half, we see pre-serum Steve Rogers escorting those two Hasidic Jews to safety. So we see the connection across time of these two heroes.
Yeah, I like this issue. It sets up the villains more. Like we learn more about the villains and the reason, what they're trying to do. So as you very well explained, the nexus points and so on. And then we also see the villains from the Boone time, right? We see the two barons. And then in modern time, there's a nice little story between, Steve and Spider-Man, right? And we get to see them together. So there's so many cool things going on in this story, and every one of them progresses the story further in different time periods.
I want to see what happens next, Rick.
All right. So I will I think I should read get the solicitation on this one. Let's get to that. Misty Knight has uncovered a string of murders with seemingly supernatural origins, and Captain America has been marked as the next target. Something about the crime scene strikes Steve as familiar, but can he find the connection between the murders and his past before this mysterious new threat finds him? Find out in Stand. And I'm sorry, I hear that and I'm like, R.E.M. Stand in the place where you work, now face north. I used to love that song. Did you guys like that song?
No.
No?
That was an Atlanta band, wasn't it?
R.E.M.
Yes,
yeah.
R.E.M.
Yeah. So
yeah, it used to be the opening song credits to a early Fox TV show starring
I seem to recall that show.
who's
I don't know
who's the
what it was.
guy Chris Elliott. You know Chris Elliott? Yeah, he had his own TV show for a little bit.
Right.
And he was kind of like a loser, lived in his mom's basement type of thing.
Yeah.
That was the song to the opening credits.
Yeah. Huh.
Things I haven't thought about in 30 years.
Well, I'm glad you brought it to our attention.
Yeah.
Very.
So for the credits for this one, we got a little bit of a change here where issues 1 and 2 were strictly penciled and inked by Jesús Saíz. But this one, he gets help from Lan Medina. So Lan Medina is also penciling and inking. So I'm assuming they're inking their own pencils in here as opposed to each other's. But that's a change in the credits. The cover is still by Jesús Saíz. The release date, November 29th, 2023, and cover date being January of 2024. John, would you like to take us through the cover of number 3?
Would love to. Thank you. So on the cover, it seems to be a pretty simple, straightforward kind of thing. It's a table with 5 cards sitting on it. 1 is face down, 4 are face up, and you have the chief characters in this issue. You see Captain America, you see Asmodee, you see a young Steve Rogers, and then you see the one of the German protagonists from the flashbacks. But if you pay attention, you see that you're talking about 2 aces and 2 eights.
Ooh,
which is notoriously known as the dead man's hand.
yes. Nice
So
catch.
if you hope that maybe, and Rick knows this being a poker player, you hope that maybe there's another ace on that face down card.
Yeah,
And then you have a full house and you're not going to die. So
right.
the other thing that's worth noticing though on the cover is you've got these candles that have been burning. Each one's been extinguished. They're smoldering. It kind of adds to the occult vibe that we're dealing with here.
Mm-hmm. Bob, do you know the history behind Dead Man's Hand?
I surely don't.
So that comes from the tradition that that's the hand that Wild Bill Hickok was holding when he was gunned down.
Ah,
Yeah, so he was in a poker game, and he was killed playing poker, and there you go. Those were his
wow.
cards.
I did not
Legend
know that.
legend says that Wild Bill never sat with his back to the door. He always sat with the back to the wall, except for that last day where he got his dead man's hand. He happened to be sitting with his back to the doors of the saloon.
Huh. Wow. Thank you. That's awesome.
That'll learn him.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Sure, he
All
knows
right.
better now.
No,
John,
I
we're gonna.
gotta wonder here, like who it was a JMS who sort of conceived this for the cover, or if this was, all the artists.
That's a great question.
I don't know.
Very
We'll try
esoteric,
to
right?
remember that next week.
Yeah.
All right, John, we're going to turn this over to you.
So with issue 3, we start off with the images of Cap being thawed out and different points from his life flashing back and forward. And what he's doing is he's talking about time and how some of his buddies would even tell him that time just really doesn't exist and that everything is perpetually now. We're just perceiving it different ways. But
Whoa,
then you,
that's heavy, right?
right? Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I'm like, okay, we're getting existential here in the very first page. So, but then you turn the page and we're back to the present time, except there's shadows layered of previous things going on in this room. There's some really funky writing all over the walls. And Cap is there with Misty Knight. She's there on behalf of the Aberrant Crimes Division. And there's a man duct taped to the wall. Well, what the remains of a man who's been burned to ash, and Misty is consulting with Cap. So while this goes on, we see the crime itself being played out in these shadows, flashbacks overlaid on top of what's going on. A.I.M.'s serial killer that we just met, Henry Kavanaugh, not Cavill, has taped the victim to the wall, explaining how the shadow equations have determined how the person taped, will one day be at the forefront of a peace movement that will stop a war. So Henry is there to prevent that from happening. Henry then covers the wall with the mystic symbols, sealing the victim's spirit in so it can't pass along to another person to continue his mission. This becomes very important. This whole ordeal is they're trying to not just kill these change agents, but they're trying to stop the spirit of change from moving on to other people and still accomplishing its task. And so when he is able to kill this man and have it all sealed, what's remained besides the ash is this one gem. And or crystal, and he's able to just take that and put it in his box of souvenirs. We also, go ahead, please.
And before we continue, I think for those who aren't familiar with Misty Knight, Bob, do you want to explain who Misty Knight is? And
Sure.
I know how you like to describe
No,
what
I
they
don't.
wear so well.
No, I don't want to describe her. No, I'm not up for that.
Okay. Come on, please.
No, I'd have to. You want me to look it up because I'm not prepared to extemporaneously talk about Misty Knight's background.
Oh, well, but you could describe who she is, right?
Well,
we read about her with the Sam Wilson books, right?
yeah, I have no recollection of that though.
Okay, there's
So
too many penguins. Okay.
yeah.
How about you, John? Do you want to explain to the listeners who Misty Knight is?
So Misty Knight she and Colleen Wing are private detectives. Misty Knight has gone on to become law enforcement of other forms along the way. She also has a cybernetic arm. Her right arm has been replaced. She is a fighter par excellence, a really, really smart detective, and the occasional love interest of Sam Wilson.
There you go. All right. Nicely done.
Thank you.
Now, I think you're about to get into what she was pulling out of her pouch,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. So we're back in dealing with what's going on, them investigating. And as they're looking into this, Misty Knight reaches in. She says, I have someone who may have some answers on the line. And Steve makes a joke of Zoom calls, not exactly. And she breaks out what looks to be an action figure of Doctor Strange. And as soon as she sets it down, it gets all glowy and comes to life and looks at Steve, says, Hey, Cap. And very nonchalantly, Cap's like, Steven, so what's new in your world? Well, frankly, I'm a little weirded out. Totally get that. Just two
Fun.
co-workers
Mm-hmm.
having conversation.
Yeah,
So,
and I like because he's like, I can't be everywhere at once, right? So
exactly.
it's like a talisman of some sort.
Exactly. He's broken it out into, I think, did he say 47? Yeah, 47 figurines. He's broken out and put this little small piece of essence.
I like the fact though, Steven says figurine and Cap's like dolls.
Yes. Yes. This becomes a running gag throughout the rest of the 6-issue arc. So, all right. So while one part of the story is replaying this murder, Cap and Misty are investigating. They're having the conversation with Doctor Strange. And, I guess it's also worth noting that when Doctor Strange's figurine or doll comes to life, there has to be magic words, and the magic words are there's no place like home.
Nice.
All right. So now we're going back to Brooklyn in 1938.
And I think this is where we switch artists, right? You can see a little bit of a style
Yes.
difference here. So, Saïz is finished here, and then we move on to Medina.
Yes. And I appreciate the change in art style to go with the change in time period.
Mm-hmm.
So we pick up with Steve. He's engaged in heckling the German American Bund, attacking their ideas of racial purity. And he's talking about comparing iron swords to steel swords, how one is so pure, but it's actually weak and brittle, and the other one is mixed, so it actually comes out stronger. Steve is ridiculed by the speaker, chased off. As he walks away, he is picked up in a car by mobster Meyer Lansky and taken to his office, an actual historical figure, mind you.
And this is his first appearance in the comic.
I believe so. So there, Lansky explains his interest in Steve, that he too was a little kid who had to stand up to big guys. Steve explains his hatred of the Nazis is his opposition to bullies. We've definitely heard that before. Bullies who are cowards and will wilt when facing superior numbers. Lansky explains his own concern with the Nazis and how he wants to stop them. He has done some harassment, but he has learned that there is a big event coming called Operation Garden. He has had his men investigate, but they didn't get very far because, well, they look like gangsters. So while the police are dealing with that and he's trying to find out more information, he turns to Steve and says, I want you to look into this matter and report anything that you find out on the operation. And Steve agrees. So now we're going back to the future, but not quite all the way to the present, 6 weeks prior.
My head hurts.
To A.I.M Island, where Travis Lane, Ariana Walters, and Henry Cavanaugh have met, and Lane and Walters explain to Henry how he will take on a new guise as the emissary. An armored suit and injections of a super serum have been prepared, as well as exposure to gamma radiation. The demon Asmodee appears, citing how human agents cannot be trusted. So for this operation, the demon must bond with the emissary. Travis Lane doesn't care for this a whole lot because the implication is that Asmodee is going to leave his body, and he does. And so Travis Lane then gets consumed by fire and dies gruesomely. The demon
Couldn't
enters
happen
him.
to a nicer guy.
Oh,
Indeed.
right.
He got what
The
was
demon,
coming to him.
he did,
Yeah, it did indeed.
just like that guy in the boat.
Yeah.
The demon enters Henry's body to observe the next part of the operation. As Cap departs from the crime scene, he is confronted by Henry, now the emissary. Asmodee within tells Cap that having let him live decades ago was a mistake. So now he must die. And we end on
Wow.
it's fight time.
Yeah, it's fight time.
Nice cliffhanger.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Another good issue. Just advancing the story and then introducing new characters, right? We get to see the mob, the gangsters, basically,
Yes.
they get introduced. So, and they're an important part of this story. And then we also get to see the gruesome death, like the way Kavanaugh is going around killing people. What a horrible, horrible, scary way to go. I mean, I got a little bit of chills
It is.
doing this, and I thought JMS did a masterful job explaining how Kavanaugh killed somebody while Cap and Misty Knight and Doctor Strange are there doing the investigation, right? Like the way it went back and forth, it could have just, here's the death, and then here's them afterwards checking it out. But no, he intertwined them. And I thought that was just so well written and entertaining. And then on top of that, Saez did an amazing job with the art to explain that. I mean, imagine getting that script and saying, okay, make it visible, make this intertwining, going back and forth work. And he did a masterful job at that.
Yeah. I thought, Kavanaugh, he's a scary dude, right? I mean, he sees what just happened to Travis Lane with Asmodee leaving his body. And then Asmodee says, I'm going to bond with you. I need your consent. And Kavanaugh goes, you betcha.
Right.
Right? Like, wow. Wow, he's a seriously demented dude.
Indeed. All right. Should we get to number 4?
Let's do it.
Absolutely.
All right. So number 4 is the solicitation is the enemy strikes. When the mysterious organization targeting Captain America goes on the offensive, Steve Rogers thinks he's prepared, but the battle is not what it seems. Who or what is the emissary? And the title of this story is called A Series of Unexpected Attacks. And in this one, we do have the full penciler and inker is Lon Medina. So that's a change. And then the colorist, we have Espen Grudengern, I believe is how he's pronounced. So this is another Jesús Saíz cover. And Bob, you want to take us through this one?
Sure, Rick, I'd love to. So it looks, what we see here looks to be, it's a white cover, basically in the background, but in the foreground, we see the emissary, and we see Cap locked in what appears to be mortal combat. And they're being pitched from the left side of the cover toward the right, off what seems to be a collapsing building. And so the emissary is on the top position with his 2 double-bladed knives, one in each hand, plunging toward Cap, who's falling backwards. And Cap has reached out with his right hand, and he's grabbed the emissary around his basically his collar, and his shield arm is pitched back over his left shoulder, as if he's getting ready to bring it up and strike forward. So we see a flow of motion occurring here in this battle. It's really a great cover, I think, to show these 2 forces locked in mortal combat.
Yeah, I agree. Would you say the emissary has the high ground?
Indeed, he does.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he's using that momentum and you could see the momentum of like his right arm coming down as Cap's left arm is cocked. So, and with the falling bricks and everything, it does lends itself to a really nice. And I think the shadowing is really cool too.
It does. I mean, it shows, just the flow of the scene, right? As if they're flowing past the light.
Yep. So, on this one, Captain America has been challenged in the street by the emissary and the demon-powered serial killer, Henry Kavanaugh. So Cap employs what he calls his ham sandwich, which is a method of quickly assessing an unknown opponent. And I thought that was funny because he even mocks the name a little bit. He goes, I came up with it, so I can name it. And I thought it was almost like a reference to number one when the stranger said Steve looked like he could use a ham sandwich. And maybe that stuck with him. I don't know. But and as they fight, Cap decides the man is an experienced killer, but is yet unfamiliar with his powers. So Cap, even though he's the emissary is stronger, Cap breaks his foe's leg, and then he breaks the other leg, and the emissary then marshals his dynamic powers, taking Cap by surprise and totally changing the situation. The emissary unleashes several fiery blasts. Cap leaps through a hole in the brick wall and seals it with his shield. And the blast directly at the shield flips Cap into the river, sinking out of sight. I would just say I kind of went quickly through that, but that's a heck of a fight scene.
Indeed, yeah.
I mean, it just I loved seeing Cap like, all right, I need to assess the situation. I'm unprepared. I'm out here in the open. Let's see. And then you hear what's going through his mind as he's assessing the situation. And he's just such a seasoned pro at this, right? But then he sees that this guy's a demon, and like that changes everything. And he realizes he can't run, he can't be out in the open, so he splits the difference and goes into the building, which then blows up, and like I said, he goes into the river. Then we flash back to 1939, and we're in the harbor, and it's Baron Zemo and Baron Strucker. And again, these guys are in their civilian identities, right? They're not who they end up becoming at this point. And they're going over their big plan. And as we heard before, at the upcoming big Bundes rally in Madison Square Garden, there's going to be a bomb that's going to be detonated, killing 20,000 of the faithful Nazis. And the barons will place the blame on the communists and the Jews, leading the USA to come to the aid of the Germans, making an unbeatable combination for the upcoming war. But the barons don't know that their plan has been overheard by a dock worker. So also in 1939, we see a weak young Steve Rogers. He's working hauling bricks at a construction site, and he's been offered a phony job by the mobsters, but he refuses to take it. And his foreman tells him to take it easy, but he declines. And on his way home, he passes out. And then he awakens in his apartment, and he's visiting. The visiting nurse, Emily Costner, examines him, and he reveals his bad medical history. So she orders him to take it easy and promises to take a look on him later, and then he goes off to sleep.
I love this scene when he's in bed and he's being evaluated by the nurse, and he goes through the litany of all of his maladies. Right. I mean, it's everything from partial deafness to rheumatic fever, on and on and on. And then he also says he's a terrible dancer.
Yeah,
So,
I love the sense of humor, right?
Like,
yeah, he and then the next thing too, he says, and he challenges her, and he says, what are you gonna? Who can say? And she goes, I'm a nurse. He goes, okay, slight edge. Like
right.
he's got a sense of humor, and it's dry. It's very dry. He's not overly kind of like, trying to make a joke. You know, he
Right.
just got the little zingers, and you know.
Yeah.
So in the present day, we go from the younger Cap sleeping in the bed to present day Cap waking up in a hospital bed. And there's Steve, and you know, in hospital, I guess, gear, right? And Sharon Carter tells him that his shield was so hot it raised a cloud of steam in the river that led investigators to locate and rescue him. And he tells her about the demon, and then he promises to tell her the rest after he makes a phone call. And there's a nice little, it's a little fun going back and forth between the two of them. And you also get a sense, because we hadn't seen Sharon prior to this, right?
Mhm.
So, but you also get a sense of their history, because she, just by a few words and his mannerisms, she picks up right away. Oh, demon. Okay. You know, and then they have, and she has her arm around him. And so you can just sense from just a few panels here that, you know, they have a very long standing, serious, romantic history together. And he says it's not the first time he's pulled from the river, right? And there's a I would say it's a flashback, because it is, but it's also foreshadowing of something we haven't seen yet, of a young Steve in a vehicle in the river. All right, so we go back to 1939, and then the Nazi named Rolf. Hey, do you think the Muppet Rolf was named after this Nazi?
Muppets don't tend to like Nazis.
Yeah.
No?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, no, yeah, you're right. You're right.
All
You're right. I was thinking of the two old guys, but
right.
Oh, they definitely don't like
they
Nazis.
definitely don't like Nazis.
So Rolf raises the demon Asmodee, and the demon fills us in on Hell's agenda, which is they're very jealous that the creator blessed the human race, and demons are now devoted to destroying the humans. And the Madison Square Garden plan is certain to succeed, except for an aberration that he cannot identify, but it's likely of no importance. But we all know it's Steve Rogers. And then we cut to present day, and unable to reach Doctor Strange by phone, Steve calls Misty Knight, and she reveals that the murdered man from last issue was to speak at an upcoming peace conference, and it sounds familiar to him. And then he asks if he could borrow the Doctor Strange doll he saw last issue. And that ends the and I might as well go bum bum bum, because it literally does end with bum bum bum.
Right.
Not just me, but I like the funny you know, tit for tat kind of going back and forth between Sharon and Steve here. You know, he grabs her phone, and he's like, "When did you start taking pictures of food?" And she's like, "It's a thing." And he asks Misty, and she goes, "Absolutely, it's a thing." So a little bit of a commentary on I think today's times, but you know, from a man out of today's times, you know.
Right.
So I enjoyed that lightheartedness, right? You know, because it can't all be danger and drama. You know, you got to have these lighthearted moments, and I think JMS does a nice job mixing them in.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a great scene in this issue, Rick, that I think you underplayed, but it's so brilliant. And that is when Asmodee and Rolf are talking about Operation Garden and what's about to happen. You know, and Asmodee mentions this aberration that he senses, and he calls it an infinitesimal aberration that he can neither identify or understand, smaller than the smallest grain of sand.
Yeah, I was going to mention that, but I can't say the word infinitesimal.
Understood. Yeah, understood.
Okay.
But it's great, right? Because of course we know we think we know what he's talking about here, you know, and it's the underestimation. Did I say that right?
No,
You're asking me?
No.
No,
not
yes,
even
no.
close.
No, the misunderstations of underestimating.
There it is.
Yeah, there it is. Right? Yes. Just playing, yeah. Yeah, so, just gratuitously underestimating Steve Rogers' potential as this infinitesimal aberration, this smaller than the smallest grain of sand. Never
yet-
underestimate Steve Rogers.
That's right. And yet, I think it's also a saying, or just implying that, we all, even the smallest of the smallest of us can make a change. We can affect change.
I feel like we should break out into a song right about now, but I don't know which one would be appropriate.
Yeah. I'd like to
Huh.
buy the world a Coke.
That's the one. Rick knows I'm a big fan of 70s on 7 on my Sirius XM, and I hear the
Dude,
original
I told
song
you
for
they
that all the
don't pay us.
Maybe they
It is
will,
your
Rick.
satellite radio.
Maybe they will, Rick, if they hear,
Uh-huh.
So,
All right, keep going. Yeah.
I love the original song. I can't remember who the heck sings it, but I always want to insert the name of the soda pop into that song. But in the original song, it's not in there, right? It's the original song. But I hear that at least once a day. So I'm glad that we were in a synchronicity there for a second.
We've
So, moving
been doing
along.
this together way too long.
Yeah, moving along to issue 5, shall we, Rick?
Absolutely. And the solicitation for this one is new information about Captain America's recent attacker, a mysterious figure known only as the Emissary, has Steve Rogers, Misty Knight, and Sharon Carter scrambling to protect a peace rally from being this new foe's next target. But how can masters of physical and mental might defend against the supernatural prowess of an ancient evil? All right, looking at this one, we have a new colorist, Espen Grutengern, if I'm saying that right.
Sounds right to me.
Everybody else is the same writer, same penciler, inker, letterer, and editor. Release date January 3rd, 2024. Cover date March 2024. This cover is not by Jesus. It is by Torrin Clark. Bob, do you want to take us through the cover?
Sure, I'd be happy to, Rick. So what we see here on the cover is, it looks like the facade of a building with, one of those old payphone booths, the glassed-in payphone booths. And we see Steve Rogers standing in one of those booths with the transceiver held in his hand. Of course, it's corded, these old boots. And he is looking toward the reader. And he's got his left hand up, palm toward the reader. And we see a number of bullets, 3, I think, like speeding toward the phone booth in which Steve is standing. Really beautifully rendered. These actually look like actual bullets, brass bullets, interesting enough, this is not how bullets would actually be fired, but whatever, for the sake of art, they're rendered as a round of ammunition. And then above Steve, we see Cap, and he is from the waist up, and he's leaning toward the reader, and he's got his shield in the right hand, and his left hand is reaching out toward the reader, and he appears to be like yelling, like he's maybe yelling an order or issuing a command of something. And it's a beautifully rendered Cap. We see the detail in the chain armor. We see the wings on his cowl. I mean, it's a really beautifully and colorfully rendered Cap that we see here.
Either one of you guys get a Matrix vibe off of this?
Yeah,
a little bit because of the bullets, almost like they're
Just
going in
with
slow.
the hand
he
on the-
sees them in slow motion.
Yeah, and then the hand up and all, and he's holding the phone. It's almost like you're expecting him to just dematerialize.
Mhm.
right. That's
Yeah,
a good call. Yeah.
But it does suck you in. It is.
Yes.
It does what a good cover should do, right? It's like how does Steve get out of that one? Like,
So, the very first panel, We see a montage of all of these villains that Cap has fought with before. And he's thinking to himself again, I've seen and fought some pretty strange things in my time. And these are some of his the strangest foes that he's fought. Not the normal ones like, say the Red Skull, right? Or Batroc the Leaper, or, any of these guys, right? These are sort of the off the wall ones like MODOK and the Serpent Society and
Baron Blood.
Baron Blood, right? Yeah. And he's thinking to himself, I've seen and fought some pretty strange things in my time. Vampires, societies of snake men, a giant head in a flying chair, but none of it prepared me for the Stephen Strange doll. And so this story opens with Cap and Sharon in Misty Knight's office, and he's gone there to consult with Dr. Strange via that small figure that Misty Knight had shown him earlier. And in this meeting, Strange isn't there, but he's projecting himself into this figure again. And Strange shows him, Cap that is, 4,527 demonic signals in seconds. And so that Cap can pick out the one that he has seen being carried by the emissary. And, a signal, if you don't know what that is, Rick and John, it's a type of symbol used in magic. It's usually a pictorial representation of a deity or a spirit, such as an angel or a demon. And so he goes through the whole list of them. And it's pretty amazing that Cap can whiz through these and finally pick out the one. And Strange is able to identify that signal as Asmodee, the demon of wrath that was bent on destroying mankind since the very inception of the human race. And Strange also points out to him at this point that Asmodee is way too powerful for Cap to face and square off and expect to win. Cap asks Strange at this time if he can help him out, right? Join him in this battle against the demon. But Strange and Clea are in the middle of an extra dimensional battle with a bunch of monsters. And so he's a little tied up at the time. So Strange tells Cap to take this figurine with him so that if Strange figures out something later on, he can get in touch with Cap or Cap can reach out to him. So Cap is forced with, carrying around this small figurine of Doctor Strange, at least for the time being. And now we know what those pouches are for.
Well, he's not carrying around the whole figure though, right?
Right, just the head. Good point. Yeah.
Yeah, he snaps off the head because he's like, I don't have enough space for you.
Right, yeah.
He's like, snap off the head.
So we go back in time, Rick. So we're back in February 20th, 1939. And this was a little bit confusing to me, I have to say, because we see Mr. Mueller, who was the old superintendent of Cap's apartment when he lived with his mom. The Mr. Mueller that was able to find this apartment, thanks to Arnie Roth, for Cap to move in his new place. And so Mr. Mueller shows up and he tells Steve that he came to warn him. So we learned that Mueller had infiltrated a Nazi rally and was able to take photos of Baron Strucker and Zemo together before he was caught. And a Bundist goon pursued Mueller, and he was eventually beaten up. But just as he was about ready to, get beaten into submission and possibly even killed, he kicks out at this Bundist guy and knocks him in front of a speeding car and manages to escape with his life. And so now he's come to Steve, and he's there to tell him that something is going to happen that night. And so Steve knows that he's got to reach back out to Meyer Lansky and let him know what's going on. So, we're back to the present day now, and we're outside of that peace conference. And Misty Knight is there, and she's meeting with the conference organizer, and she's suggesting very strongly, in fact, that they cancel the event because 2 people now that are connected with the conference have been murdered. But the organizer, being as passionate as she is, cites the importance of the event and says, we're not going to quit. We're not going to back down. And at that point, we see that the emissary is watching. He's disguised as one of the maintenance worker. And we can tell by the look on the maintenance worker's face that the emissary is quite pleased with the organizer's plan to press ahead with the conference, because that is precisely what they want. So, prompted by the Doctor Strange figurine head, Cap asks Sharon to help him protect the conference. But before we get into that, we go back to 1939, and we now see Zemo and Strucker outside of Madison Square Garden. And they're there basically inspecting the progress of the plan. And the plan, of course, is to detonate a bomb underneath the Nazi rally at Madison Square Garden, killing some, if not all, of the 20,000 Bundists that are there in attendance. Steve Rogers is also there, and he's spying on them from the bushes, but he's spotted by one of the Bundists, one of the guys, in fact, that he had run into in the park incident in issue number 2. But this time, the guy has had a change of heart. Like, he didn't sign up for mass murder, and he realizes, because he's the guy we saw in the previous issue that had overheard the plan. And so he goes up to Steve and he tells him what the Barons are planning. And then the man is shot by Strucker, and Steve begins to run for his life, pursued by the Nazis. And he makes it to a phone booth, which is what we see on the cover of this issue. And that gets riddled with bullets. So he barely escapes that trap before he dives into the sewer, eventually making it to Lansky's headquarters, where he tells the mob boss what's about to happen. So at that point, Lansky organizes his men to head over to the garden. And of course, he wants to leave Steve behind, because Steve is, he's been shot at, he's been beaten. He had to swim through a sewer to get there. He's exhausted, he's sick, but Steve insists on being taken along with Lansky's men. And so when the two groups get together, the Bundists and Lansky's organized crime squad, a riot ensues. And now we jump back to the present day outside that peace conference, and Cap has arrived, and Sharon is there, and she's got her SHIELD folks surrounding the building, watching out for bad guys. Cap is then called inside. He goes inside, and then suddenly the whole building is sealed off. All the windows, all the doors, everything is completely sealed, as if by some form of magic. And the emissary is inside as well. And he steps to the podium and announces to the crowd that everyone in there will soon be dead. And Cap steps forward at this point to challenge him. And so what we see is really 2 eras of Steve Rogers in this final page leaping into action. On the left side of the page, we see 2 panels that show Cap with his shield ready to square off against the emissary. And on the right side, we see 2 panels, Steve armed with a baseball bat, ready to charge into a melee with the Bundists outside of Madison Square Garden.
Love it. Absolutely love it. I really like that scene where Steve, in his Captain America uniform, but he has his mask down. He's in the park. He's sitting on the bench, and he's there with Sharon, and they're just kind of going back and forth talking. And then the little Stephen Strange doll head keeps interrupting, and it has like commentary
Third
coming
wheel.
from the pouch,
Yeah.
And they're like,
Right.
"Shut up, shut up, Strange." I just,
Yeah.
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 I like the humor.
I got to tell you, there was a part of this particular issue, and it's it's an artifact of the change in the art team. When Mr. Mueller shows up, he looks completely different, at least to me, than he had the way he was previously rendered in like the first couple issues, where he looked a little bit pudgier, maybe a little bit follically challenged. And in this issue, he's a lot thinner. He's got a nice head of hair. And so I was a little confused, like, who is this guy all of a sudden? He's got the same name as the other guy. And then, of course, light dawned on Marblehead, and I figured it out. But certainly,
Because Asmodee possessed him, right? Is that why?
No, this is Mr. Mueller, his old superintendent.
Oh,
right?
I'm sorry. Okay.
Yeah. So I thought it was a completely different guy. But it's the same guy. So it's just it's the impact that a different artistic team can have. Can for better or worse, can inject a little confusion, at least for me anyway.
All right, let's get to number 6. We're going to finish up this story. And the solicitation for this one is Captain America versus the Emissary. It's a fight to the death as Captain America races to take down the Emissary before he destroys a peace rally and Cap himself. But when physical might proves futile against the supernatural, will an assist from Doctor Strange be enough to turn the tide? Find out in Beast. Now this one has La Medina, the penciler. He's inking, but he gets a little assist from Bellardino Bravo. And but the rest of the team is still the same: writer, colorist, letterer, and editor. Release date was February 7th, 2024. So not too long ago. Cover date of April 2024. What? That's the future. How are we reading a comic from the future? I don't understand. Maybe we'll have to use Bob's logic.
Yes.
The cover on this one, Turin Clark. And you know what? John, you're taking issue 6. Why don't you take us through the cover?
All right. So here on the cover, you've got a great action shot of Captain America right there, center, throwing his shield, but his shield's a little different this time. It's got something there on the center sitting over the star. And behind Captain America, you see the somewhat misty looking appearance of Doctor Strange carrying his, his hands in the making sigils. And there's a sigil underneath Cap there on the cover as well. So definitely got a combination of magic and Cap's super soldiering. All right. So
you know what? I'm going to say, Bob, look out, because you do an excellent job doing the covers.
Okay, I consider myself warned.
I'm trying my best on my audition, man.
On notice. I am on notice.
All right, so we start off the issue. We're back in February of 1939 there at Madison Square Garden, and we are right in the thick of it. Steve Rogers has joined the Hoods in fighting the American Bundists in order to stop the bomb detonating that would kill them all. Then you flip the page and you get to the very aptly named Simon Convention Center. And Captain America in the present day is trapped there in the center with the emissary, otherwise known as serial killer Henry Cavanaugh, possessed by the demon Asmodee, as he announces to the peace conference his intention to kill them all, picking right up where we were. Bounce back to 1939, and we've got Steve and the gangsters locate the truck containing the bomb, but it is armored and they can't break in. Steve points out that he is small enough to crawl in through the window, and the keys are in the ignition. Convenient. The window is broken, and Steve drives off with the truck. As the bomb starts to detonate, Steve drives the truck into the river and swims away, thinking of his mother, and then the bomb goes off. Back to present day, Misty Knight and Sharon Carter manage to drill through the barrier sealing off the center. Cap tells them to evacuate the center, taking the conference members to safety while he battles the emissary. Cap barely holds his own against the demon's powers until Dr. Strange, speaking through the doll figurine in Cap's pocket, comes up with a solution. After a few minutes, Strange places the Eye of Agamotto on Cap's shield, just like we saw on the cover, giving him the power needed to defeat his enemy. Cap continues hitting the emissary until Asmodee is exorcised from Cavanaugh, who then collapses. Back to 1939, Steve awakens in the hospital. The doctor informs him that his injuries, placed alongside his litany of health problems, means that he has at most 5 years to live. Across the street is a Nazi possessed by Asmodee who draws a bead on Steve with a sniper rifle. Asmodee stops him, saying that killing Steve now would only make him a martyr. Rather, he should die an invalid in bitter agony over the course of the next 5 years. But then Dr. Erskine comes along. Back to the present day, Steve's renovation of the apartment building is finally complete. Steve offers Sung Kim the job of manager, but Sung turns down the offer, explaining that the family has plans to move to Seattle. After the goodbyes are over.
That was a surprise to me. Like I thought he was going to take it. Right?
It was a huge surprise to me until we get to what happens next. So after the goodbyes are over, Mrs. Rosen comes and tells Steve the real reason that the Kims left, suggesting that Steve take a look at the street where the Kims parked their van. Steve goes over and discovers the wall is covered with swastikas and Nazi slogans. As Steve whitewashes the wall, he muses that things happen in cycles, and if the Nazis ever come back, he'll be there and he'll be ready for them.
Great ending. Would you guys be okay if I read it?
I would be upset if you didn't, Rick.
I think that's absolutely in keeping. Yes.
Because, coming full circle, JMS did a nice job, starting with inner monologue of Steve and then I think ending here. The arc of history is born in moments that are rarely recognized for what they are. Tides that shape the world, define generations, and, for some reason, always seem to come in cycles. On one side are those who have allied themselves with the power that shares their hate. On the other side, those who have sworn to never again let the beast straddle the world on legs of steel and fire. We didn't end the war with Germany because we decided to stop fighting Nazis. We stopped because we ran out of Nazis to fight. They ditched their uniforms and ran from the field of battle. So if anyone else ever wants to put those uniforms on again and step back onto the battlefield, well, I'll be waiting for them. That's strong stuff.
That's good stuff.
All right.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. Well, guys, I gotta tell you, I'm so glad we went through this. It was such a good story on so many levels. I think the writing on this was not to say that previous stories didn't have great writing as well, but this one was simple. It was very, very on a level. It was just very simple story, but it tied together so many elements that I thought were really important, and mostly focusing on Steve Rogers as opposed to Captain America, and seeing him what created the hero, right? I like the story on so many levels, but I'll shut up and I want to hear what you guys have to say.
Yeah. Well, I like to think of it as it's like an origin of an origin story, number one, right? Because, we know the origin story of Captain America, but this is almost the origin of that origin story, how Cap got to that point where he was so sick and on death's door when Erskine found him. So number one, that's great. And, to Rick, I'm a sucker for real world history. And I love how JMS has woven so much actual real world history in real world persons into the story. My only regret is he didn't, there was a guy that night at the Bund rally at Madison Square Garden, a guy by the name of Isidore Greenbaum. Maybe you never heard of Isidore, but he was a Jewish man who rushed the stage in order to stop that event. And he had to be rescued by police after he was beaten and stripped by the Bundes stormtroopers. But that's real courage right there, right? I mean, that's not a fictional character. That's a real dude who was taking it to the bad guys. That Fritz Julius Kuhn, who was in fact, he's in the comics, but he was the real head of the Bund up there speaking in Isidore, wasn't going to let it stand. So I love that real history one has been used, but I hope it encourages people, especially young people, to then dig a bit deeper into that real world history and learn it.
First of all, thank you for bringing Isabel's name up, because that is a real hero right there. You know what I mean? I'm glad we're recognizing that person. And thank you for that. I really appreciate that, because those types of things can get lost in history.
Yeah.
I want to go back to what you said, that, we see that Steve was on death's door when he went to Erskine, and then you said and that's great. I didn't like that part. I didn't like that part because in my mind, it comes into question Steve's willingness to potentially sacrifice himself for this experiment, because that to me was always so brave. But
Mhm.
if you have a terminal illness and you're going to be dying anyway, and you don't have as much to lose. And that was the first thing that came to my mind, was like,
Hmm.
okay, it almost taints his his sacrifice and his um braveness, because he was going to be dying anyway.
Hmm. What do you think, John?
That's very interesting. I hadn't thought of it that way. And I see your point. The only thing I'll add that just comes off the top of my head is JMS is going to be continuing with some of these themes. The solicitations for issue 7 have already said as much. So we may end up going back to revisit this, and who knows? Steve has shown, even in these 6 issues and in other previous stories of his, how much he was an overcomer before he was Captain America and beaten significant odds. Again, as Robert called it, the litany of illnesses that he had. Um,
I love the fact that he calls you Robert.
Well, I looked up and saw his name on the screen.
Who is that guy?
Oh, that's
Uh-oh,
Bob.
Bob, you're in
Anyway.
trouble. You're getting called Robert.
But we may end up coming back to this and finding out, what, he was given 5 years to live. Maybe he already beat those odds before he got to Erskine. Maybe not. Maybe that's just me being hopeful, but I totally see where you're coming from.
I do too. I don't think, but here's the thing with Steve. I don't think, not that I think he's irrational or a Pollyanna, but like none of this comes as a surprise to him, right? He's had these illnesses before. And we see the way that he reacted to the nurse who gave him all these instructions and told him, you shouldn't be doing this. You got to stay in bed. You got to do this. You got to do that. He's an optimist, right? And I think even though the doctor is telling him, well, you've got 5 years to live, I don't think he accepts that. I don't think he's the sort of person who believes it, and thinks that there is a way, with enough persistence and determination and moxie, which was a term used in the title of, I think, book 5, right? That there's a way out of this. And so, yeah, I get what you're saying. I just don't think that message of what the doc is saying is really resonating with Steve, because I just don't think it's in his nature.
I like that. I'll go with that. I think your answer is so much better than mine. All right. So any other thoughts before we get into favorite panel and all that kind of stuff? Any other thoughts about this story?
I'll add that upon reading the first issue the first time, I was over the moon with it. Absolutely loved it. As I started getting more and more into the issues on the first readings, I kept getting this feeling. It's like, I like occult stuff, stories about demons, read Ghost Rider, sure, all that stuff. And I love Cap, but this feels like somebody served me a plate of Brussels sprouts and Reese's peanut butter cups smashed together. And I'm like, I like each one, but I don't want them on the same plate.
Ah, okay.
Okay.
But this is true of a lot of some of my favorite story arcs and comic series. This benefited so much from a revisit. So one of the reasons why I really appreciate you inviting me to come on, because I don't know if I would have gone back and reread, all of everything together, especially not this soon. But a lot of other things just came out to me, and I'm like, wow, this is really great stuff. I loved pretty much every bit of the flashback stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And Rick, something you said in the course of our discussion tonight is really what encapsulates it so well. And that is seeing Steve Rogers in these flashback sequences and how he's standing up and what he's doing communicates. You don't have to be a superhero. You don't have to be in the, stars and stripes on a uniform. You don't have to have a super soldier serum. These are some things you can do as average human being, or maybe even below average human being in terms of health. You can get out there and still make a stand. And I appreciate, Bob, what you brought up about, remind me of the name, please.
Isadora Greenbaum.
Isadora Greenbaum, because that's somebody who did just that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think, it would be interesting talking with JMS next week and just asking about, what is the theme? What is the message that he's trying to get to the readers? Is there something overall that he wants to talk about? And frankly, I also want to know, he's been out of comics for a while. What was it that drove him back to comics, and why did he pick Captain America? Of all characters. And
Great questions.
yeah, can't wait to chat with him about that. All right, so let's get to we're going to do favorite panel, t-shirt worthy, and time capsule. So John, you being our guest, you get to go first. What is your favorite panel of these 6 issues?
All right, so I thank you for letting me go first. I actually listed several just in case you guys took mine away.
All right, backup plans. I like that.
But if I get to pick my absolute favorite, I'm going to cheat just a little bit, because I'm going to make it the combination of 2 panels, and that is where the young ladies are dousing the toilet leavings at the bottom of the page, and you flip the page and you see the brown shirts, as Bob said, truly becoming brown shirts. That was fantastic.
Yeah.
Absolutely loved it.
Yeah.
I guess so. I mean, I really don't give a shit. Bob, what was your favorite panel?
He took it. So Rick, I've already hinted at this. It is issue 2, page 15, center left panel. Steve laying in bed, looking up at his dad's medals in the shadow box hanging on his wall.
Yes,
to me,
very nice.
It resonates personally with me. Because I made a shadow box of my dad's medals. Unfortunately, I didn't get it. He gave it to one of my nephews, or actually one of my great nephews, one of his grandsons. And so I was a little upset at first, but then I felt pretty good about it, because that young man will look at that for years, and he was close to his great grandfather. So I'm happy it went to a good home. But I understand the connection of having that. And so seeing that image of Steve, number one, having that connection with his dad means a lot. But the other thing is, we've talked about this a lot. And we particularly talked about it in volume 7, right? And Steve's relationship with his father, and the way that his father has been portrayed in some runs. And so I like this as a more wholesome representation. Mr. Mueller, who knew his dad in the younger days, and Mr. Mueller, who emigrated from Germany, he said in that scene that he was afraid that Steve's father would sort of look down at him or look askance at him because he was German. And Steve's father had fought in World War I. But that was never the case, that his father was always open-minded and treated him as a friend. And so I like that about this panel. That all speaks to me in that one panel.
Very nice. It's always great when there's something that can touch us on a personal level, which probably explains why John picked the poopy one. All right,
how about you, Rick?
I'm gonna go with my favorite panel. Actually, I'll go with my favorite panel. I'll get there, but my favorite page is issue 2. Page 2, and this is the one where he's in the audience for the first time in the park at the Boone rally, and he's he's there, and there's these two big guys come up to him, and they're like, why are you talking like that? And he just kind of smiles at them and goes, let me guess, this is your first time in Brooklyn? And and then uh and then he's like, you better go. Yeah, go home crawling to your mother. And he goes, now that was your mistake. And he starts rolling up his sleeve. And then, you see him walking, and the old man says to him, it looks like you've been in a fight. Well, you see the other guys. And then, then he says, I don't think it's going for you as well as you think it is. Give me time. And you see that confident, like the determination on his face. Love this whole page. Love this whole page for the humor, for the sentimentality of it, for the just all the different parts of Steve Rogers that I love. But if I got to pick a favorite panel, I'm going to go with the one where he's rolling up his sleeve and he says, see, that was your mistake. And he's looking, not even looking at them in the eye. He's just looking down at his arm as he's rolling up his sleeve. He knows he's going to get his ass kicked.
Right.
He knows.
Yeah.
He's not under any kind of, false bravado here.
Yeah.
Right. But it's, you just disrespectfully talked about my mom.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I don't know. I love that panel.
Indeed. Yeah. That's a great panel. It says all you need to know about Steve.
Exactly.
Yeah.
All right.
How about a t-shirt, Rick?
Oh, okay. We'll go with me. Sure. T-shirt worthy. I'm going to go with some humor. Because I love this. We're going to go with issue 5. And I'm going to go with page 1. And that's the one, Bob, were you describing? And like the first panel had all the weird, villains.
Yeah.
And then underneath that were 2 panels where Cap is talking to the figurine. And it says, doll, figure, doll, avatar, doll, astral projection range extender. And you're just seeing their 2 faces.
Yeah.
Right. And I just want to take that panel right there of that exchange between the 2 of them. And I want to put it right here on my chest.
Yeah.
And see how many people raise their eyebrows when they're trying to read, like, what the hell is going on your shirt? And I'm just going to have a little slight laughter to myself.
I love it.
All right, Bob, what are you putting on a t-shirt?
I'm going with the cover of issue number 1, Rick. Because I love the juxtaposition here of a young Steve Rogers, all bruised and beaten and bloody, his shirt, untucked, his shirt torn, and then above him looming is that waist up image of Cap with his shield at the ready, and he's getting ready, cocking back his left hand, ready to punch. And I think just having that, even without the buildings, just having those 2 figures, it sends a message, right? That one, of course, it's Steve Rogers and Captain America, but one is there's a hero in all of us, right? Every young boy, young girl who's been beaten and pushed aside, there's a hero waiting in everybody. So I got to have that on a shirt and wear it proudly.
I like it. And how about you, John? What are you putting on a t-shirt?
So for the shirt that I want, mine comes also from issue 5, except instead of the very beginning, mine is the very last page where you have Cap and Steve split right down the middle, each leaping into battle. I want a button-up George Perez style shirt with Cap on one side, Steve on the other, just leaping right out at you.
Nice. All right. We're going to extend the rules a little bit here for you. Like, we did say t-shirt worthy, not Hawaiian shirt worthy, but that's okay. We'll extend it as you're a guest. And we know you don't listen to the show, so you don't know any better. All right.
I listen to the show. I'm an old man and a big George Perez cosplayer, so I need Hawaiian shirts.
Very nice. Very nice. All right, John, you go first for Time Capsule. What are you putting in the capsule?
For the time capsule, to me, it's got to be the final page of issue 6. That page that you read, that is something I believe is a message to stand for all time, but it is also a great page to commemorate this point in time where we are in the country, in the world, as nationalism and fascism seem to be on the rise all over the place. You always have to be ready and waiting to fight it when it comes.
Well said. Well said. Bob, how about you? What's going in your time capsule?
You know, I'm going with the word moxie, Rick, from the title of issue 5, Sigils, Moxie, and Chopped Demon Liver. And you know why? Because, Rick, I got
moxie. See,
yeah, that's exactly it. You know what that word means, right? I remember growing up drinking moxie, right? My mom loved moxie, always had it in the fridge. It used to be produced in Lowell, Massachusetts, where I lived. It's the oldest soda in the United States, having been produced since 1884, Rick. It's the state soft drink of Maine. But in American English, it has come to mean courage, determination, persistence. And that's how you use that. So I don't think anybody really much drinks it anymore, except in Maine, probably, in northern, maybe northern New England. But back in the 30s, it was a big deal. Soda, one of the few on the market at the time, and so hence that's where we get that term in the English language because of its popularity during that time frame.
Very cool. All right, we'll got a little moxie there.
Yeah. And what about you, my friend?
Well, Bob, I'm glad you asked. I am going to go with, and I almost yelled at John because when he said the final page,
you'll get used to it, John.
Oh, trust me, I was being yelled at years ago.
don't make me get out the metal folding chair.
No, not
John.
the metal folding chair. Oh, God. I worked for him for one day and I had to sit in that chair.
Did you work for me for a day? I don't remember
worked
that.
for you
It was
for
like
one day. I covered because all your employees were like gone and couldn't come in, and you had to go away too. So it's like, can you please just come man the cash register?
Wow.
Wow.
How desperate could I have been?
Pretty desperate. Pretty desperate.
Was this towards the end?
This was towards the end, and
I
I
was
got
probably flying to New Jersey. Yeah.
My comic collection expanded greatly that day, though. Thank God you never reviewed the tapes.
You know, I still have the videotapes.
Oh
no. No, last page of issue 1.
Oh.
So when it's the big reveal of the Nazi Bund here in New York, and I think that's going in the time capsule because one, it certainly depicts a certain time in history, and it is something worth capturing, not something to celebrate, but as they say, history, we repeat it, we're doomed to repeat it if we don't pay attention to it and learn from it. Right. So, and I think this was an eye opener. I think there's plenty of people who were reading this story going, oh, JMS just made this up to hammer home a point, but no, it actually was something that happened. It was something that happened in our time history. So it's going in my time capsule.
Nice. Good choice, Rick.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, John, I got to say, thank you so much for joining us. We always enjoy having you on the show and hearing your real voice, not some French or German accent, but we love those too. So thank you very much for coming on the show. It's always a pleasure wrapping cap with you.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it. Oh,
I was going to say you're a real treat to be around, John. So I hope we can have you back sometime.
Thank you.
Even when he calls you Robert?
Even when he calls me Robert, I will take it.
That was one time. And Batroc would never call you Robert.
My mother called me Robert once.
Once. No one else gets that gag but us.
True that.
All right, Bob, let's come back next week and talk to J. Michael Straczynski. I can't wait. I have so many questions for him, and looking forward to having him on the show.
Yeah, that's going to be a great conversation.
All right. Thanks everybody for listening. He's Bob Lucius. I'm Rick Verbanis, and you have been listening to another episode of the Captain America Comic Book Fans Podcast.